Hello, I'm Tom Palmer, and I'm reading my book, D-Day Dog, every day during June and some of July to my dog, Finn. And we've been reading it, we've got to chapter 12. But Finn, as you may, if you watched chapter 11, you might have seen Finn wasn't really in the mood to be read to. And because I need to read this today, because of things happening in my family, I'm going to read it to our cat. This is Katniss. And Katniss is named after a famous character from children's books who you might have heard of. I'm going to read it to her, but don't worry, I'm going to read it to Finn, but I'm just going to wait until he's calmed down a bit and I'll do it off camera. But so he won't lose out and he won't be upset that the cat's being read to it, but he might be. But anyway, chapter 12, to Katniss. Jack walked into town to visit the Central Library the next day. Through the sliding doors, past a smile from a librarian, and up the stairs. He knew his way around the library. His mum and dad had been bringing him here for as long as he could remember. Non-fiction was on the first floor. Turn left at the top of the stairs, along the first aisle to history, then 2 shelves down. And there it was, the Second World War. Jack found a small book easily. The small book easily. Animals that helped win the war. It had a photo montage of animals and birds on the cover, and Jack leafed through to see that each page had a few paragraphs with the name of an animal and a photograph on the top. He found pigeons, horses, sheep, then dogs and cats. Jack kept going until he saw a picture of Glenn sitting on the ground, his chest puffed out, staring directly into the camera. I'm going to read what Jack reads in the book now. Man's best friend. Emile Courtial, the son of a Frenchman and a British woman, volunteered to fight in the Second World War when he was 18 years old. He trained for a year to be among the fittest and most daring soldiers of the British Army, part of a force that would attack the Nazis from the air. Emile loved the countryside, perhaps too much, because one night he was caught off his army base poaching. Soldiers were not allowed to poach, and Emile had to be punished by his superior officer. And what was his punishment? He was given a dog, a German shepherd called Glenn. Emile's job was to train Glenn and to be a paradog. As you might have guessed, for Emile this was no punishment. He loved animals as much as he loved the countryside. He liked dogs in particular, and cats, and he came to love Glenn more than any other dog. Glenn needed to be able to sniff out the explosive mines hidden underground and hear Germans on the battlefield. He had to be able to indicate to Emile what he had heard. But Emile also had to train Glenn to jump out of aeroplanes from 100 metres up, from hundreds of metres up in the sky. D-Day would not be possible without paratroopers dropping in between enemy lines, human and canine. Emile must have worried about whether Glenn would be able to do that, but Glenn loved leaping out of planes and drifting back to Earth on his parachute, something they did at least a dozen times before the big day. They trained for more than a year. Dog and man began to communicate with each other so Emile could warn his fellow soldiers that Glenn had smelled or heard danger. They were a brilliant team and were a key part of a planned attack on an important gun position in France called the Merville Battery. But on the day of the drop, the 6th of June 1944, Glenn was not keen to jump. The noise of the flak around the plane as the Germans fired at them disturbed the dog. When the moment came for the big drop, Glenn cowered, trembling under a bench. Emile and another paratrooper had to pull him out of his hiding place and throw him out of the plane. Some people say that Glenn had a premonition about what was going to happen next to him and his master. Jack swallowed. He had a bad feeling about the last few paragraphs he had read about Glenn and Emile. In his mind, he was again imagining throwing Finn out into the night with bombs and bullets and tracer fire all around him, Finn cowering from explosions and cracks of gunfire. Jack imagined the look Finn would give him if he tried to do that. Would Finn still trust him like he did now? Glenn and Emile had done all the training together. They were just like Finn and Jack, a dog and a boy together, listening to each other, understanding each other. Jack felt sick. No, he could never do that to his dog. What had made Mr. Salah think that him finding out about Glenn was a good idea? Jack rubbed his face. And what did it mean in a book when it said Glenn had had a premonition? A premonition of what? Jack breathed deeply. He would read the rest. He had to know what had happened. Do you want to know what happened, Katniss? Are you sick of hearing about dogs? Sorry. After the confusion in the aeroplane, the dog and the young man landed some safe distance away from their intended drop zone, Jack read, along with many other British paratroopers. It meant that for the attack on the Merville battery to be a success, the men had to move quickly to get to the correct location. The Merville battery was a German gun position which could aim huge shells at the beaches where the Allies would be landing later. It had to be destroyed or thousands of Allied soldiers would be killed. Emile and Glenn joined up with some other men to march in the dark to the Merville battery, the skies above them full of sound and fury. Glenn led from the front, with Emile beside him, the dog listening out for the enemy in the fields and the hedgerows around them. No doubt he was sniffing the ground to make sure the men did not step on mines. As Jack read on, his eyes blurred with tears. He knew that Emile was buried in the Ronville cemetery, but he hadn't really thought about what must have happened to him and Glenn. It was too much. How could Emile have done that to Glenn? How could he put his dog in danger, throwing him out of a plane into a war zone? Jack's mouth felt dry. He coughed, wondering if he was going to be sick. He was disgusted by war, disgusted by Emile Courtial, even disgusted by his dad for being excited about war and making Jack feel the same way. Well, that was it. Jack didn't think war was exciting anymore. And that is the end of chapter 12, and that's where things change dramatically, because from being someone who loves war and is excited by war, Jack is sort of worried about war and realises that war is a terrible, horrible thing. But there were just a little aside, because we've got Katniss with us and she's had to listen to lots of stuff about dogs. Cats have won medals. There was a famous cat that was in the British Navy who won a medal because that cat killed lots of rats that were in the kitchens in the ship. And if that cat hadn't done that, the men wouldn't have had enough food for their mission, and they'd have had to turn back. But because the cat killed all those rats, it meant that their mission could go ahead. And so that cat was given a medal, which is called the Dickin Medal, Dicken. And if you look up the Dickin Medal, it tells you about all the different animals that have been awarded medals. And I think you deserve a medal for listening to this, but I'm going to let you go now if you want to. She does. Anyway, thank you for listening. Normal service will be resumed with chapter 13, and Finn will be back as long as he's a good boy. Thanks for listening.